Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Olson. I am a visual effects artist and Star Wars enthusiast, and today I'm going to be talking about lightsabers. This effect has changed drastically from the first rendition in the late 70s. And as we've seen in recent Star Wars media, there's been a transition to a more realistic approach where the blades fan out and grow transparent and a little bit more colorful. They're not just this white solid light. And if you are like me and find that effect satisfying and amazing, well, I'm going to be giving you the secret to creating that effect for yourself inside of After Effects. This tutorial is dedicated to the Saber Competition. It's what got me into filmmaking and visual effects as a career. It's an annual film competition with a Star Wars and action sequence theme. I highly recommend checking it out. And if you're a Star Wars fan like I am, enter this year. There's still plenty of time before the deadline. And to all those already planning on entering, I'd just like to say that while visual effects are not required for entry, they are strongly encouraged. And I gotta say, it is super cool to see a video holding a real lightsaber. It is just an awesome thing to witness. So I recommend that you find whatever style of effect suits you and your project and give it your best shot. This is a new effect that requires a new technique. While the old way of lightsabers was a white solid that received a color and glow treatment and was placed on top of your blades, this is all about generating a glow that fits in the scene a little bit more naturally and enhancing the prop blade rather than covering it. Due to the nature of that, there is no one size fits all when it comes to the values of each effect that we will be putting on top of our footage. And while I think that the values I use are a good starting point, especially if you're out in similar lighting conditions, they most likely will need a little fine tuning from you once you've dialed in your look. With that in mind, let's get started.
First step is to rotoscope the lightsaber. To do that, I am going to right-click in the timeline panel, select New Solid. I'm going to make this white. I'm just going to name it for organization. Now the color of this doesn't matter. We are just using this to grab the roto later on. So you can think of this layer as a placeholder. I'm just going to turn the visibility off, and I like to use a 6-point mask for the rotoscoping. On these top three, I'm going to make these Bezier handles by clicking and dragging. Typically, I'll make the 2 points on the outside of the hilt just single points without these Bezier handles, and then I'll make the center point with the handle again. This gives you a little bit more control, but it also makes sure that you don't have a ton of points to move on every frame, because that will make the roto take longer. In the timeline panel, I'm going to hit M twice. That's going to open up the mask settings, and I'm going to click this stopwatch here next to mask path to enable keyframes. When I roto, this is now going to store the information. Now that our mask is made, I will go through, and on every frame, you're going to want to move the mask to follow the blade. And you will do this on every frame. Here you can see that the saber blade is cut off from the camera by the actor. We're just going to put this mask right on top of it because we're going to come through in a moment with something called a subtraction matte. So once you've completed your roto, you'll come back, and in this same solid layer, you're going to add a new mask and roto the shapes of your actor. Now these should be kept as simple as possible. The more complex the shape, the longer it's going to take to move it. Another thing I like to do with subtraction masks is right-click on one of the points, go to Mask and Shape Path, and click this Roto Bezier option. That will give you something close to a Bezier curve where you're not having to move all of those handles manually. What you want to do is, in this blend mode on the mask, you need to switch it to subtract. And the important thing is to keep all of your subtraction masks underneath the mask for your lightsaber roto. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and have my roto completed, but you'll want to do here is roto all 3 of these lightsabers and complete the subtraction mats. It's really important to remember that each saber needs to be on its own solid layer. We're going to start with this blue one here in the middle. So I'm just going to hide the other 2 for now and bring them below the footage. I'm going to first create an adjustment layer. You can name these what you want. I'm naming this Core Boost because this is going to be used as a color grade to increase the exposure of this saber blade. In the Track Matte field, I'm going to click this No Matte drop-down menu and set it to Track Matte for the adjustment layer. Instead of it being No Matte, you want it to be set to Michael Matte, which is our roto for the center saber, or whatever you've named that solid layer. Inside of the Effects menu, I'm going to go to Color Correction and select the Exposure tool and switch it to individual channels and set the red and the green to a value of 1. So that's pushing the exposure up in just the red and the green channels. And the blue is going to get an exposure of 2. And so you can see it's really nice with these plastic prop blades because when it's static, or at least somewhat static, you get a brighter, almost white core. And when it fans out, it loses that luminosity and you get to start seeing through to the background and get more of the color of the blade, which is what we're after. The next step, you'll duplicate the matte 2 times and select the 2 new duplicates and pre-compose. We're going to be making what's called an edge detect. So this is where we will be creating a layer that has an alpha channel that only follows the edge of our lightsaber blade. So we'll turn these 2 layers back on, and this bottom layer, we want to solo the visibility, and we want to apply on this matte a simple choker. Just a quick insert here, the set channels and curves effect you're seeing on my roto layers should not be on yours. I only did that because I was rotoscoping in a different software and I exported the roto as different colored mattes. And I was just setting the alpha channel to those colors and then fine tuning it. You can just ignore those. That's just because of the way that I brought my own roto in, but your roto is going to be on a solid layer in a mask and will function the exact same way. So back in the project, once you've added the simple choker, you are going to want to increase this a little bit. I think 10 pixels or so seems to be a good option. And then on this top layer, we'll unsolo and we'll select again in this track matte option, we'll select matte 2, which is our bottom layer, and we'll invert the alpha. So now you can see we've got our edge detect, and we can go back into this bottom layer, which is our hole cutter essentially. And if you increase the choke matte setting, you're going to cut less of a hole. If you decrease it, you'll cut more of a hole. We don't want this to be too thick because we're just after the edge. And it's important to look at this through more than just one single frame to make sure that we're kind of getting the result that looks good throughout. So seeing this in wide motion, seeing it with no motion, seeing it somewhere in between, just check it through the whole shot. It looks like here we're getting the desired result. I am going to add a Gaussian blur to this because that's going to help soften the roll off into the center. This will help us not feel like we've got such a harsh edge when it transitions once we start color grading. Now we're going to move back into our main comp. We're going to add another adjustment layer and call this Michael Edge Color. And this is going to be our edge detect. That is our track matte for this color. And we're going to add another exposure tool and break apart the channels again. This time we're going to want to push the blue exposure higher than we did before, and we're going to bring these up to 1 again as well. And we want to find a good frame for this. This is more of an effect we're looking for when it's static, and this is what we want to be the color of the lightsaber. So I'm going to actually turn off the red exposure entirely. You can see what this is doing. It's slightly boosting the edge color. It's giving it a little bit of a fringe of intense color, which a lot of the newer sabers are putting into their cores. And I think it looks really good in the final comp. Our next step is going to be duplicating our footage layer, duplicating the matte layer, and pre-comping these together. We're going to call this Ambient Glow. I like to work with the glows by taking the widest glow first and blending that into the scene. Make it a really nice washed out soft glow. Then make a glow that's not quite as wide, but it's much more intense, and it kind of sits with the saber a bit more presently. And then the third and final glow is going to be a really intense small glow that sits near the inside. So we'll start with this ambient glow first. We're going to take the footage and select the track matte option, set it to the Saber matte, and now we have this isolated blade. And we're going to overexpose it with the exposure tool again. Let's set it to a value of 2. We're going to pre-compose these 2 layers together. The reason you need to essentially double pre-comp this is you cannot add a Gaussian blur to the footage layer when the track matte layer is beneath it, driving the alpha information. We essentially need to get that alpha information and our color information from the plate in one single layer. Then we can apply the glow method, which is using a Gaussian blur. We're going to call this ambient pre-comp, and now we can add the Gaussian blur and push this really wide. It becomes invisible. We're going to duplicate this and then change the value to be even wider. If I increase the exposure of the plate itself in the preview panel, you can see that it is doing something even though it's hard to see when the exposure's set to normal. In this case, I'm going to be pushing the glow a little bit wider and a little bit softer. I'm going to add a new solid layer in this pre-comp and make it black, and I'm going to drag the black solid layer to the bottom of the comp. That way we can change the blend mode of this ambient glow to add, and we can color correct this however we'd like. In this case, I like to use color balance and color balance HLS and put the blue values up high. Preserve luminosity is an important button to click when you're working with glows and highlights like this. And sometimes I like to add a little bit of the shadows, which can kind of give it a more vibrant, deeper feel. If you want this to be a lighter blue, you could add some green into the color balance or use the HLS tool in the color correction. You can then use the slider wheel to change the hue of the color to your liking. That's the approach I like to take, and as you can see, this glow is super subtle. It's pretty hard to see. It kind of washes out the darker costumes and parts of the scene. Now you're going to want to repeat this step by duplicating the ambient glow pre-comp and rename it wide glow. So now we know what we're after. And just really quick, I'm going to change the name of this pre-comp to glow pre-comp since it's really just the base that we want to be using inside the glow. I'm going to open up our wide glow pre-comp, and instead of having the Gaussian blur values so blurred out you can't see it, we'll start reducing the values to bring it down to something we can see but is still relatively wide. I'm going to add one more Gaussian blur layer and set this one to 250. Now we're going to drag this wide glow in on top of the ambient glow, and we're going to set this layer to screen. What's nice is we have our color grade set up for our glow already. We can now just copy our color correction effects and paste them into this new glow layer. Now you can make this lighter, and I'm going to push it just a tiny bit more to give it a more washed out blue. 22 degrees gives me the value I like, so we're going to set both of these to 22 just to standardize it. In this case, this wide glow is a bit strong, so we're going to drop the opacity down and slowly start bringing it back up with the slider until it sits naturally in the scene. It looks like 75 is what looks best here. Then I'm going to select the wide glow in the project panel and duplicate it again and rename this inner glow. This is going to be our third and our final glow. After this, we should have a lightsaber looking pretty good. Now we're going to have 3 pre-composition layers in our inner glow, and we're going to have the blurs increase at incremental levels. These are going to be much lower values, which is going to make them look much brighter. So we're going to drop the opacity of some of these to look a bit more like what we're after. We're reducing these because when we screen them on top in our main comp, it's going to take out all the colored motion blur that we're after. So dialing back the opacity of these layers can be helpful. In this case, I'm going to take the whole pre-comp down to about 50%. This is the step that's going to have you dialing in your own values. But this is basically the result we're after within this new technique. But here I think we might be losing a little bit too much of the tip of the blade. So I'm going to drop the opacity down more. And I'm going to come into the pre-comp for the inner glow and reduce the opacity of the individual blurred layers even further. This becomes a little bit of a back and forth game because I do want to keep the inner glow pre-comp a little bit higher in opacity. I do want it to be a little bit softer, and inside of our edge detect, we do want to make the edge blurrier than we did previously set it. And now we're going to watch the whole footage. Again, there you have it. This is the new style of lightsaber effects inside of After Effects.
Well, now that we're through our tutorial, you should have a lightsaber worthy of a true Jedi. Now, if you feel ready to take on a larger project, and I highly encourage you to do so, there is still plenty of time to enter into this year's Saber Competition. The deadline isn't until January 31st. I've got a link to their website below where you can find all of the information on rules, more tips and tricks for filmmaking as a whole, and just everything Saber Comp is going to be right there for you. Now that's all from me. I hope to see a lot of killer entries in this year's Saber Comp, and may the force be with you.